Hello, my lovely listeners. Welcome to another episode of The Period Party. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I have a very special guest joining me, and her name is Caroline Zwickson. She's a certified health coach and joy mentor. Caroline also happens to be one of my dearest friends, so this was a really fun conversation to have. Caroline is on a mission to revolutionize how we approach and cultivate joy in our lives. Drawing from her background in counseling psychology and her own personal journey, she has discovered that when joy takes center stage, everything in our lives, including our careers, relationships, and health, works better. As the creator of Easy Joy, a transformative 28-day challenge, Caroline has guided countless individuals towards embracing simple, daily joy rituals that have the power to create lasting change. She is also the host of the podcast Joy Class, where she interviews inspiring thinkers and experts to unlock the secrets of consistent joy. In today's episode, we delve into the profound connection between joy and our menstrual cycles and hormones. Caroline shares her insights on how joy can mitigate stress, support our adrenals and HPA axis function, and ultimately enhance our overall well-being during different phases of our cycle. We also explore the distinction between happiness and joy, uncovering why joy is a fundamental component of our holistic health. Caroline's own journey as a mother of 3 children, a lover of nature, and a hobby painter has allowed her to truly understand the importance of finding joy in life's simple pleasures. Through her vibrant energy and expertise, she empowers us to cultivate joy even in challenging circumstances and embrace a life of fulfillment. Hi, Caroline. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. For everyone who is watching and listening, Caroline and I have been friends for almost a decade now. Can you believe that?
hmm
It's really crazy to think about everything that's happened in the last 9 years since we became friends. I mean, like, basically everything's changed. It's kind of
Everything's
incredible.
changed.
Everything has changed. I know. And I feel like you have had quite a metamorphosis in your work and the work that you do, because when we first met, you were so intrigued by the women's hormonal health side of things. And you even worked with me, and we did a lot of stuff in other trainings, even as well, in women's health. And then you transformed into doing that work from your life coaching business. But now I feel like you've circled back a little bit to the life coaching.
Right,
And I would love
right.
for you to talk about your experience, because I now obviously you are, really focused on helping people cultivate joy. And why are you now so passionate about joy and teaching people about it?
Right, right. So I think I've always been passionate about joy and happiness. I'm an optimist by nature. I was raised by an optimist. And so I think I've always had that in me, like looking for the light, and like serving as an optimistic voice for my family, my community, my friendships. I think that kind of is something that's always been innately who I am. But I did have this pivotal experience about 2 years ago. Um, where, it was like during the pandemic, I had just had my third baby. I was homeschooling a kindergartner while my other 4-year-old toddler was like bouncing all over the house. And I just hit a wall where I just was so overwhelmed, as so many people were during that time. I was overwhelmed. I was stressed. I was really burnt out. And I went on this walk, and it was kind of like the beginning of springtime. And I went outside, and first I just, was bawling my eyes out because I just felt so much pressure during that time. And then I had this experience where on my walk, and I'm somebody who is very tied and connected to nature. And so I do tend to find pieces of joy in nature. But on this walk, I walked under this canopy. It was like a tree that was just blooming in these bright pink colors. And I actually stopped walking, and I just stood under it and let like all this beauty that was surrounding me just literally like shower over me. And I felt so much joy in that moment. And I went home, and my whole day changed, right? Like I had so much more patience for the kids. Like my whole mood was lifted by this super simple experience of joy. And I felt it so intensely on that morning walk. And then I had a great conversation with my husband over dinner. Like everything just changed for the rest of the day. And so that's when I really started to think about joy, and that it's not it doesn't have to be this sort of like accidental thing that we all hope for and that we all want, but that maybe it's actually something that we can intentionally cultivate in our everyday life and have it be this sort of like lifting force and this really powerful energy provider and this tool that can lead us to be more optimistic and more present in our lives. And so then I started to play with this idea of having a joy practice. Right, we have so many practices in our life, like exercise practices and how we eat and all this stuff, but what if I actually put a lot of my thoughts into really understanding what brings me joy in this season of my life, right? Because it's also different now that I have three little kids. It's very different from what brought me joy in my 20s, like that has changed and shifted. But how can I make intentional space for joy every day instead of waiting for the vacation that's maybe coming next year or waiting for the weekend when I maybe get 2 hours to myself or whatever it might be, instead of pushing joy sort of like ahead of you and always chronically waiting for it. What if we can actually build that into our everyday life and have it be something that just keeps us buoyant?
Yeah, what such a
So,
revelation, by
yeah.
the way, isn't it? I was thinking about that as you were saying that.
Yeah.
It's not that it's for me when I think about what you're saying, it's not that revelatory, yet it is in our modern
No,
world because it's
it
so
yes.
right because of the world that we live in.
Yes, it isn't revelatory, and yet it felt like that to me, even though I was somebody who had many moments of joy and happiness in her life already, but I don't think I think a lot of us think of joy as sort of like the reward at the end, the lucky afternoon when all responsibility falls to the wayside. But we don't think of it as something that we can intentionally cultivate and pull into the center of our life and have it be just a part of how we operate in this world, you know?
So true.
Um,
By the way, can I just
yeah.
say
And
really
so,
quickly that I've had so many moments under very bright pink flowering trees in the springtime because they bring me so much joy too. Like I
oh
take
my God,
photos of
I
them
know.
and videos of them, and it's like a thing. Hayden knows very well that I love a pink flowering tree, so I just makes me so
Yeah.
happy that that was your turning point.
Yeah. And so I want to use this example that you just gave us because now I have identified it as something that brings you a lot of joy. And so now because it's not in your subconscious or unconscious, it's now in your conscious awareness that this is a joy fueler for you. And so for you to seek out those moments and really take up just a minute to stand under it and feel the joy. That's even going to make it more intense than you walking around and being like, oh, this is so beautiful and I love these flowers. But it's like, oh, let it shower me with joy. Like that awareness, bringing it from your unconscious into your conscious is actually really powerful in terms of how much joy you can actually reap from different experiences and simple experiences like that.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I never really thought of that, me seeking it out. And because I'm aware of what it is that brings me joy. And so that sort of leads me into my next question for you, which is what happens to us when there is a lack of joy in our lives?
Right. So my personal experience then had me reflect on joy and the role of joy in my clients' lives. And I've been life coaching and health coaching over the last 10 years and have had the luxury of being an intimate part of people's lives and how they think and how they act and all that stuff. And so what I started to observe and what I started to really understand is that when joy is absent in people's lives, they're so much more likely to burn out. Their relationships become more brittle and their health just suffers because stress, to me, joy is the antithesis of stress, And so, what I see, for example, in relationships is that when people don't have joy, or two individuals are trying to be in a relationship and neither of them has a lot of joy in their lives, they're tiptoeing around each other. They're like little bombs that are about to explode. Little things just tick them off so much easier. We don't have the bandwidth and the resilience that we get when we have joy in our lives. And so that's something that I just saw happening over and over and over. And that's really why I then decided to make it something that I want to talk about professionally and really focus my whole business on, because I just saw it to be this really powerful anchor point where people, instead of just working on their relationship or just trying to improve their career and not burn out and just focus on getting rid of all the stressors, what if we can actually pull joy in and become really aware of what gives us joy and make space for that in our lives and watch so many of our other little problems actually just kind of go away and lessen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like you described that just on that one day that you had where you were standing under the tree, and then it had a ripple effect throughout the rest of your day.
Hmm.
I know it can be
Yeah,
so
because I think
simple.
joy gives you, yeah, because joy gives you so much energy. It gives you clarity and it gives you resilience, right? Like people become so much more resilient when they have joy in their lives. And I think that's specifically also really important for our health. And I'm sure that's connected to stress and the role that I can't prove it because I'm not a university professor with its own lab, with her own lab, but I have no doubt that there's a really, really significant connection between how much joy a person has and how they respond to stressors in their life, you
Right.
know?
Well, I mean, you've probably seen this. You've obviously seen this in your own life and seen it anecdotally in your own clients.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
100%.
sure. I mean, I feel like 2022 was the year that I reclaimed my joy, and part of that was from your influence, actually, unsurprisingly. And I just, things like water slides bring me a lot of joy. And so I feel like I actively made a point of figuring out what things brought me joy and experienced those as much as I possibly could. And just so everyone who's listening knows, I am not a joyful person. This is not something that comes easy to me. And I think a lot of that has to do with my sort of adverse childhood experiences at a really young age. And I feel like that shaped a lot of my life and my outlook on life. Do you feel like that plays a role for some people or for all of us if you have these adverse
The way we
experiences?
grow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So there's actually really interesting research on optimism. And I think joy, again, like when you have joy in your life and when you're brought up by parents
Yeah.
who role model what joy looks like, to be able to just take a break and really soak up the joy all around you. I think if that's something that you're role modeled from your early childhood, life is going to go very different for you. The things that you feel are normal and important in life are shaped by the things that you watch early on. And so there's really interesting research on optimism specifically, and how whether or not you're optimistic depends on if your primary caregiver was an optimist or a pessimist. And so I thought that was really different, because interesting, because what they were saying is essentially that your primary caregiver explains the world to you, interprets the world for you before you can do that for yourself. And so if that person explains and interprets difficult things in the world for you in an optimistic way, that is how you're going to explain things to yourself later on. And so I
Right.
think that's really, really powerful. And I believe that joy works similarly. Like if you're brought up by somebody who in the afternoon like took 30 minutes to just sit in the sunshine and like really soak up the joy that comes from being outside in nature, for example, like I got that from my mom. My mom has a deep affection for nature. And I think I inherited that from her because I saw her do that all the time. And so I don't really feel guilty going outside and spending time in nature, because that's what was just role model to me as something that's really normal and good for you, you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think the way we grow up matters a lot.
I mean, I completely agree too, and I think that really extends to everything, all habits, right? Everything that we're exposed to at a young age. So of course, it makes sense
Right.
from the perspective
Yeah. Like
of
if you
your
want your kids to eat
caretakers.
healthy,
Yeah,
yeah, like if you want your kids to eat healthy, like eat healthy food in front of them,
right.
you know. And so there's so many of those things, like our kids are watching us and we watch our parents more than we are aware of in our conscious mind, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think back to last year and you had me do this exercise. It was so easy, everyone. And it's something that
But
never
that's
occurred
like
to
the
me.
best part.
It is. I know, right? It's so true. I know. We'll talk about that, how easy this actually is. But so, everyone listening, Caroline had me do this exercise, and it was to just do three things or find three things in a day that brought me joy and then document them in some way. And then share, I had to share them with you because, accountability and all that. And it
Mhm,
was the first time in a really long time that I was actively focused on creating joy in my day. I mean, aside from like the pink flowers and stuff in the springtime, and the
mhm,
water slides and whatever in the summertime. But this exercise literally changed how my days played out. So it's very much what you described in the very beginning of the conversation. And it got me thinking about childhood, of course, because I'm always thinking about that and how, the interplay of
mhm,
my adult life and my childhood. But it got me thinking about this effortless, almost innate joy that children feel just living their life, just going through their days. And like, when does that stop
mhm.
happening? Do you feel like there's a time in people's lives typically where we stop doing that? We stop seeking out joy? Or is it just an innate thing that just goes away as we get older?
Yeah, I love this question, and I think it's a really interesting question. I don't have, like 100% sort of like certain answer to it, but my thoughts on that are that there's some people who don't lose their joy. And
Right.
there's some people and there's some kids, and I see this in, like now my kids are 7, 5, and 2, and I see that it already at their ages, there's some kids who are more restricted in their joy. And I'm not sure that every child feels as free, like feels equally free in the pursuit of their joyfulness. And I'm sure it probably shifts depending on people's lives experiences at different times, but I certainly think that the world that we live in now, where there's so much pressure to perform, like kids are scheduled all through the day. And I think joy happens in those moments when you can just be completely present with a certain activity or in a certain moment or with a certain person. And I think joy ties a lot together with single focusing and being really focused on something that you love, and I think in this day and age with like kids going on social media and on TikTok and all the things like so early, that pulls you out of being present. That just speeds up your life dramatically. And I think that's very much the opposite of where we find these moments of really deep, subtle, calm joy, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
Um, those are my
Yeah.
thoughts on it. And then you have those adults that like, are well in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and they still have a lot of joy. And I think part of it is because they kept their joy channels open. And like the exercise that you explained that you did with me, like even just looking for three things in your environment, not going out of your way, not making it difficult for you to, oh, now I have to like go and do something joyful, but just looking around and like looking for something that you find beautiful that can give you joy, so it's like very easy, very subtle things, but they opened up your joy channels, and once they're open you start to see more stuff that also brings you joy. You seek out more connections with people that are joyful, and joy comes easier the more you practice it.
Yes. I mean, with any habit, right? It's just,
Yes,
that's what
yeah.
happens. I know. I think about that a lot. I really started to think back to when did that go away? And I think for me, there was a very defining moment. Obviously, you know this, when my dad died very suddenly when I was 11. And I
Mhm.
felt, I distinctly remember that feeling. And now I can articulate it as an adult, but it did feel like all the joy had been sucked out of our lives. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I encourage everyone who's listening to really think about that. Obviously, not everyone had that kind of traumatic experience, but to really think about when you stopped sort of effortlessly finding joy in your day to day living. And I think I get the
Right.
sense that it comes with just growing responsibilities and adulthood. It's like we just don't have time for that. It's like I say, "Oh, I don't have time to exercise," or "I don't have time for whatever." And I think maybe we sort of push that to the wayside as well.
Yeah, I think so too. What I want to point out here, and I appreciate you sharing about your experience, and I'm obviously aware of that. And we both had pretty traumatic events happening to us when we were 11.
Yeah.
And I will say that there were years that followed that were really difficult. And there's still going to be difficult times in our adult life. And there's going to be harder seasons. I call them our personal winters now in adult life and for probably forever. But I think that if you're connected to your joy and if you can intentionally seek out those small moments, they're going to keep you more buoyant. They're
Yeah.
going to make you more resilient, you know? And so I
Mhm.
think it really, really starts with awareness, and it's never too late. Like even if somebody is finding themselves in a really difficult time. Or maybe some of you listeners say, I've never really had a deep connection to joy. I don't even really know where to start with this. Maybe joy isn't something that I experience in my life. And I just want to urge those people to really like take a day where things are a little bit more quiet and get to know yourself. Understand what brings you joy. It's going to be really different from what brings somebody else joy, and that's great, right? Like it's really about discovering your own individuality and finding the nuances in life that just give you that inner feeling of, oh, yes, I love this.
It's so good.
So
It's so good.
it's never
And
too late.
it's right. I completely agree with that. And I think it's something like I said, I've really reflected on, and I felt like what you said, there was so much truth in that you had someone, so you had your dad, who I know is a true optimist and is always seeking joy. And so I could see how that really, that helped you stay in that place, even going through hard times. Whereas I did not have that at all. Like, I don't think I had anyone who was
Role
modeling that for
model
me
that.
really at all
Yeah.
until I met my first husband. I was in my early 20s, and he was just such an optimist, and I was so pessimistic back then. Oh my gosh. And he really pulled me out of that. It was a total shift. And so I feel like
Yeah.
that, was the first thing. And then Hayden is also a perpetual optimist. So thankfully, because it reminds me, it's a constant reminder for me that I can choose differently.
Yeah. Do you find that their optimism becomes contagious and that
Totally.
you buy into it? Or do you feel like, oh, they're so optimistic, I'm going to lean into my pessimism? Like
I
what
mean,
happens for
it's a
you?
bit
Because
of
I could
both.
I could see both
I
happening.
feel, yeah, of course, right? And I'm so curious what everyone listening thinks about this too, because I think that we all have tendencies towards certain types of personality traits. For sure. There are some days where I'm like, "Ugh, could you just like get down here with me?" Please.
Yeah.
But for sure, that's rare, compared to the more positive effects that it's had on my personality and my outlook and our lives and all of it. So I think it really
Yeah.
is contagious. And I mean, they say that, right? Isn't there like an old adage about joy being contagious?
Yeah, I mean, I love that, and I believe it. I had the same experience with my dad too, where sometimes he can be so optimistic. Where I'm like, oh, this is like becoming so unrealistic. I can't go with this anymore. And then I go into maybe a more pessimistic view, but ultimately, it's just always more fun to be on the optimistic side of life. And so I think, yeah, his optimism tends to overpower any pessimism that I could bring to the table. And by the way, I will say this about my dad because he really is an optimist and somebody who has joy in his life, but he has not had an easy life.
Yeah.
And I don't want, sometimes I think that people compartmentalize like, oh, this person runs happy. This person is just happy, like no matter what. And this person just has it harder. And I don't think that that's always the truth. I think that there's a lot of people who have very hard lives and they can still find the optimism and the joy in their life. And again, it takes practice. And some people may have had it easier because they had an adult that role modeled that for them. But I don't think that anybody is stuck in one way of being, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to point out.
Can we talk a little bit more about that? Like those who do live in extremely challenging circumstances, and in many cases, it's ongoing for a lot of people, whether that's financial situations, or maybe having to take care of a sick child or a sick loved one, or I mean, there's so many things, and I I just wonder if there's I don't know if there's any evidence of people doing this, but I feel like
Mhm.
maybe there is, and I don't know if you have any experience with that. Can anyone create joy in their lives?
Mhm. So I believe the answer to that is yes, but it looks differently. And I had a client who was tending to a loved one and eventually lost that loved one. And for her, it became smaller. The pursuit of joy really started to live in the very small things, right? Like, and I think sometimes we can think of joy as these like big things, the big vacation, and like everything has to be fine in my life in order to have joy. And I think that's actually how people define happiness a little bit more, is when like things are just overall buoyant. But I think joy is a lot more subtle and a lot more in the sort of like details and nuances in life. And so if you're going through a really challenging season for whatever reason, make it small. Like grab a piece of fruit that you love and just sit down in the sunshine in the afternoon and enjoy it and be present with that. Like maybe share it with a loved one. Cultivate relationships that feel joyful to you. I think that that can go a really, really long way. But whatever brings you joy, think really small and do those things consistently. I think that will get you a lot further than thinking, I just have to muscle through this time. There's absolutely no joy to be seen here. And we're just going to have to make it through. And then hopefully on the other end, things are going to be better, you know?
Mm.
Um, this question actually also makes me think of my grandmother, who she passed away now a couple of years ago, but she lived through both world wars, and she would talk about how even during like when like during times when sirens were going off and they had to go and hide in bomb shelters and like all of these kinds of things, how then somebody would come, like somehow the town would get like a sack of sugar, and like how joyful and happy everybody was to just have like a little bit of sweetness in their life. And so I think even in those narratives, like you can read stories about people who have overcome a lot of hardship, and a lot of those people who did that successfully found little things to be joyful about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
um
So is
and so
that, do you
my
think there's
overall
this,
answer,
oh no, you go. I'll let you talk and
yeah, no, so my
I'll
overall
ask.
answer is yes. I do believe that people who are going through challenging seasons can find joy. It just looks different from people who are going through a really great season and have an abundance of joy.
Yeah, it makes me think that in times of scarcity or challenging times that um the small, even just these little small things can really change your day or change your outlook. It doesn't need to be these big things. And I feel like the more comfortable we get in our lives, the bigger the things feel like they need to be to bring us joy and happiness. That's what it feels like to
Yes.
me. Yeah.
Yes. I completely agree with that. And that's why I created one of my challenges. It's called Easy Joy, and it's a 28-day challenge where basically I lead you back to all the small things, like the teeny tiny little things that you can do in a day that are so easy. They're not expensive, like they cost nothing. And they're super simple to do, you know? And I think if we can find our way back, that's where how we really open our joy channel. It's like what we were talking about earlier, is by finding an abundance of small joys everywhere. Because the truth is, life is full of those like beautiful and magical things that are constantly surrounding us. We're just not looking, you know? But
Exactly.
I think joy is available all the time.
That's so beautiful. And, something I wanted to ask you about is the difference between happiness and joy. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think that maybe there's confusion there. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the differences between those two.
Yeah. So my thoughts, and this is not like an officially defined thing, because I think both of those are feelings, and therefore they feel a little bit, like everybody has sort of like their personal spin on it. But the way I think about them is that happiness is you can go through a happy season, right? When like everything is more or less fine and you just overall feel happy. And joy can also happen in times where you're not happy. They can also happen in those times when you're maybe going through a loss or something like that. Like perhaps, like for example, a person can go through a loss of a job or a heartbreak or a loss of a loved one. And overall, they might not feel happy, but maybe that evening they snuggle up with their kid and just have this really, really sweet, like little snuggle session on the couch before everybody goes to bed. And there can be joy in that moment. Do you know what I mean? And so that's kind of how I see the difference between happiness and joy. Like joy to me feels a little bit deeper and a little bit more subtle, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great definition. Yeah. It made me think of happiness is almost, it happens in moments. Whereas joy is sort of this underlying current. Maybe I'm wrong,
Right.
but that's what it
Yes,
felt like for me.
that's how yes. Yes, and I think that if you can I think that everybody can shift their foundation to be anchored into joy. And that's what I mean when I say like we need to work on opening up our joy channels. We need to have easy joy practices that put joy in front of our eyes consistently and in an easy and effortless way because that's what ultimately is going to make life so much more buoyant.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that with the advent of social media and everyone displaying their highlight reels for everyone to see every single day, particularly celebrities and very wealthy people, um, I feel like there's almost this underlying feeling for a lot of people that they have to be doing, like we talked about, really big things to feel joy. And and
Right.
that there can't be any joy found in sort of like the mundane, or there's a feeling that all of these other people don't have all these mundane things happening in their day-to-day living. And I think that you really turn that on its head when you describe just this sort of easy joy and finding that within your day-to-day living.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the whole social media thing, along with like people having such perfectionistic standards of what their life should look like before they can be happy, I think is a really, really big detriment to our society. Like, and it extends into what we expect from our kids, even. Like it's our wallet, our bodies, our children, like everything is so perfectionized on social media that if that's what you're looking at all day, of course you're going to feel behind and unhappy, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. And so you talked about your 28-day challenge. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Do you feel like that's where people should start if they want to cultivate more joy?
Yeah, I think it's a great start for people. It's really, I mean, as it says, it's called Easy Joy. It is easy, it is so doable. And what I loved about this challenge is that it really guides you strategically through different mind joys and body joys. And there's a little tutorial in there also for how to have a more optimistic mindset, which I think is really, really fundamental for all of us to know in order to graduate from this challenge and continue to incorporate joyful things into your life. But yeah, I mean, I loved creating it, and all the feedback I've gotten from it has just been so wonderful. And yeah,
That's amazing. And so can you just share with everyone where they can find you and find this challenge? 'Cause I'm literally about to sign up. I feel like, why have I not done this yet?
so my website is Caroline Zwickson, ZWICKSON.com. And the Easy Joy Challenge can be found on there, or you can also say carolinezwickson.com/easy joy. And then I'm also on social media and you can follow me there. I share a lot of joy oriented content from my own thoughts, but also from my podcast, which is called Joy Class. And so you can find me there at Caro Zwickson.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caroline. I can't tell you how grateful I am, not only for your friendship, but for all your wonderful insight into, the human psyche, because I feel like you have been just a guiding light for me on so many occasions throughout the last almost decade, like we were saying. And I so appreciate you coming on the podcast. This was so good.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicole.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at NicoleJardim.com/quiz.